Hello, and welcome to Under 1000. My name's Thomas Flower, and each episode I'll read you a new piece of flash fiction. All of the stories are 1,000 words or less. Today, I'll be reading The Complacency of Knowing. Efforts had been made to reclaim the future, but they were ever more aware that it was slipping away from them. Try as they might, they could not convince their other selves that it was worth putting in the work, and as such, a stalemate was slowly being reached between the ages. It had all begun with the invention of a simple machine. A machine they had dreamed of creating for many years, but one with only limited capabilities still. It could go forward, and it could go back, but they could not control exactly when. Sometimes, upon use, it would travel 50 years into the past, or 100 years into the future, or possibly just to the middle of tomorrow. The only thing that remained constant, and which they came to rely upon, was that it would always return to the moment it had been activated. In that way, they were able to begin basic explorations of the futures and pasts that surrounded them. Journeys to the past were most informative. Historical theories were confirmed or denied. Likenesses of famous figures were taken, and primary sources were recovered for further research. A boom of historical discovery seemed to be on the horizon for them. But when travelling in the other direction, towards the future, they hit upon a strange snag. It was as though, no matter whether they travelled to tomorrow or 1,000 years from their present time, nothing ever seemed to have changed or developed. The buildings still looked the same, the transport and the technology too. There were no fabulous robot assistants or miraculous flying cars. It was just like now, but then instead. The more they travelled, the more the scientists concluded that they were somehow arriving in an eternally static singularity. At first, they were unable to determine the reason for this. It was hardly as though development had stopped because humanity had reached its physiological and technological peak after all. But through further investigation and covert conversations with the local populace, they came to understand that some kind of widespread social lethargy had taken a grip across all eras of the future, stretching from today ever onwards. The people, it seemed, simply believed that there was no need or reason for them to try to discover or make anything new. As the general populace had quickly become aware of the invention of time travel, a common faith in the gifts of the future had come to persist. There was a genuine and heartfelt belief, it seemed, that there was simply no need to try to create anything new as a society anymore, because either someone from the future would visit them, or they would travel to the future themselves. It was assumed that the future was an infinitely accessible resource of miraculous developments, which they would be able to take from if only they could discover when the inventions were finally developed. And so, coming to believe that they would simply borrow benefits from their future selves, people gave up trying to create anything of their own. What was most curious of all, however, was the way in which this myth persisted. In every generation, no matter how far from their own present they travelled, the scientists would hear that people were still waiting for the miracles of technology to appear to them. Though they knew that previous generations had waited in the same way, and never seen anything for it, every generation assumed wrongly that this would spur some future generation into a frenzy of creativity and discovery, and that at last their prophesied technological advancements would come. It was as though, in some strange way, each generation tacitly passed on the burdens of creating this miracle tech to the next generation, on and on and on forever, so that advancement stagnated infinitely throughout humanity's future. Upon seeing this, the scientists were dismayed and concerned. They created their efforts to reclaim the future, to push the populations they found there out of inaction and into the better worlds they had assumed should already exist. It didn't work. Though they sent diplomats, negotiators, and orators of all stripes, people simply could not be convinced. Every time they arrived in, they were faced with the same message coming from so many mouths. Someone else will do it. Someone has to. It'll come soon. We are working on convincing future generations ourselves. We're sending our best people. We'll make a breakthrough with them soon enough, and then the change will come. They will be the ones, not us. It was fruitless. Each age was entirely convinced that they would be the ones to convince another future to finally make the change, and so no change came. Back in the present, frantic debates were held about what should be done. Nobody wanted to see humanity stagnate the way it had done, and so a drastic decision was taken. The only way for it, the only solution out, was to destroy the machines they had created and to bury the information of their existence and how to build them. Entire government initiatives were established for the sole purpose of destroying machines and silencing the knowledge of them. And as the researchers, diplomats, and other key figures were repatriated to the present, the people there could only hope that in doing so, they would erase the timeline they had seen for themselves and create something new. Nobody knew what was to come, of course. The fact was they couldn't anymore. But the lack of knowledge seemed more hopeful to them than the clear path that had been laid out before. And so, they attempted to reclaim the future by destroying the one they had seen. And then, they waited for the future to come to them, and hoped for the best. Thank you for listening to Under 1000. I'm your host, Thomas Flower. To follow the show online, look for Under 1000 Pod on Twitter or Facebook, or check out the website at under1000pod.com. If you'd like to support the show on Patreon, go to patreon.com/under1000pod, where you can sign up to read each month's stories in advance, as well as to have a thank you be read during these credits. The theme music is an instrumental version of In Between Days by Nick Tate and the Sharks. To hear the full song, and more from the same EP, go to Nick Tate, Nictate, and thesharks.bandcamp.com, or search for them on your favourite streaming platform. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and that you'll join me again next time for some more super short fiction.